Welcome to Unlocked, an NAMFS podcast, episode 10. Retention starts with support.
Welcome to Unlocked, the official podcast of NAMFS. This is where we break down the challenges, opportunities, and innovations shaping the future of our industry. Today, we're focusing on a topic that sits at the core of the long-term success for every servicer, field service company, and field professional: retention, training, and trust. We'll explore why so many vendors leave the industry and as importantly, what keeps them engaged and committed. We'll look at how policy, pricing models, and partnership structures need to evolve to build a more stable and sustainable vendor network. We'll discuss the training and onboarding approaches that truly move the needle on quality, performance, and contractor retention. And we'll talk about the critical role associations like NAMFS can play in addressing workforce shortages, improving safety, and boosting morale across the field. Because when we strengthen the people who do the work, we strengthen the foundation of our entire industry. So let's get started by meeting today's panelists. I'm Eric Miller, Executive Director of NAMFS. And go ahead, Caela.
I am Caela Oslund. I am the Assistant Vice President of Innovative Field Services, a regional preservation and inspections company out of New York.
Tom?
Hi, I'm Tom Cutsinger. I'm Director of Vendor Oversight for G7 Service Group. I've been in the industry for about 30 years, from owning a field service company to working for a GSE to a large SFR operator. So I know firsthand what works in the field and what doesn't. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for both joining. Let's just jump right into it. So, first question: what are the top reasons vendors leave the industry? And then what's working to keep them engaged? So, Caela, do you want to start?
Sure. The big topic is pricing. Obviously, people want to be paid more for the work that they're doing, but I think beyond pricing, it's also there's far too many moving parts, and then for that, far too little pricing. Each year, additional requirements get added, whether it be by the servicer or the national, the regional, and pricing remains the same. As a regional, we do what we can in our office to take any sort of load off of our contractors. That kind of seems to work to keep them engaged. Mutual respect is a huge thing. Finding out if pricing is maybe too low on something, what we can do to help them figure out the root cause of where that pricing kind of came from, whether it was a bad bid or a change from our client, and see what we can do. We handle all reaching out to municipalities, scheduling inspections with like third parties, neighbors, occupants, handling neighbor issues, responding to client follow-ups. So I think taking as much of a burden off of the contractors as we can internally helps alleviate a little bit of the lighter pricing that we've come to experience in 2025.
Okay, thanks. So that's obviously kind of a regional side of the
Right.
equation. Tom, as a national, and then obviously you mentioned some time with the GSE. Don't need to name names or anything like that, but kind of what are you seeing currently, and then what was your experience maybe with that GSE as well?
Well, I think the pricing is a big thing, but also the work being unpredictable. You have to keep them engaged. You have to have the right vendor for the right job, and definitely have to communicate with them, communicate expectations. I kind of use the analogy of a restaurant with a menu. This client may want one thing on the menu, another client may want something slightly different. So we try to communicate that to the vendors immediately. Like, this is what this client wants. This is what the expectation is. This is what we need. It just no surprises. Obviously rising costs is another reason why they leave. Slow pay, some of the times when they're working with people, the pay is not so well. Or go backs, return to property, uncompensated work. So just we try to clear all that up ahead of time. This is what the expectation is, and this is when we need it. And I think that really does a lot. Sometimes you're just trying to fill a void. We don't do that. We stop and explain everything in detail.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good. Again, I think, as we've talked about from a NAMFS perspective, finding some standardization would be huge, right? That could be a big problem solver. We know that some companies have wonderful things called delegated authority, and then they can actually, provide people that information. I think the big challenge is expecting an individual or individuals out in the field, when they're running to 5, 6, 7, 8 properties, discern that work order one is completely different than work order two, then completely different than work order three. Those become real challenges. And unfortunately, lots of times, if they have two or three of the same type of work order, they apply the same rules. So definitely something that NAMFS is trying to work on, from standardization through pricing related, uh, industry pricing increases, talking about the allowables, what the costs are, again, not just from a standpoint of, hey, there needs to be more money, but
Right.
why and what are the driving forces. So thanks for answering that. Um, Getting on to that, how can policy pricing and partnership structures evolve to create a more stable and sustainable vendor network? Tom, did you want to go ahead and take that one to start?
Well, and I think you hit the nail on the head by having more consistent standards. That is huge. Unified photos. I think creating a more stable network requires evolving policies, fair pricing, obviously, and partnerships, clearer, more consistent standards, such as unified photo, safety, and compliance guidelines, simplified credentialing, and fair, predictable process, coupled with risk-based quality control, stronger stakeholder accountability. This is a streamlined ecosystem that reduces friction, rewards high performance, and strengthens long-term partnerships. Now, because the client investor guidelines vary widely, full standardization isn't always possible. The vendors must be trained or coached and fluent in each client's expectations, much like customers in a restaurant who would order their hamburgers or their meal differently. The key to success is to help them navigate and the requirements efficiently and deliver high quality results. So I'm really big on partnering with our vendors and helping them succeed. And that's kind of the way we look at it as, so, what can I do to help you succeed?
I think another thing that maybe could be worked upon regarding partnership structures is the understanding why some work takes longer than some other work types. That is also kind of refers back to one. We have a lot of vendors who are like, how do you expect me to do a roof in 5 days? It's fairly unrealistic. And those expectations start to wear on our contractors. So I think maybe more conversations about timelines and that, permitting municipalities, some of them are just unresponsive. And I know that because I deal directly with them. It takes a while to get an answer, to get a permit, to do the work the correct way. So I think working on timelines would help create, a more stable and sustainable vendor network. I think it would help our contractors reorganize themselves. And then again, alleviates kind of that pricing issue where they're not running all around to do things that maybe more time could be allowed for.
Sure, sure. Yeah, again, NAMFS, one of the things that we've looked at in the past and had brought up, prior to CWCOT was extending that, conveyance time window, right? From the 30 days, to something more like 60 or 90, especially, even now, that's probably even more realistic given a lot of the properties that ultimately would convey over, that aren't going CWCOT, are really among the worst of the worst, right? So there's a lot of challenges there. But yeah, no, those are good comments there. Um, what are some of the approaches that you've seen that make the biggest impact on quality and retention? So, Kayla?
Um, the vendors are obviously the heart of our industry. So from the get-go, we make them aware that our staff is available, 6 days a week to answer any questions, help, with calls from field, stuff like that. I know we're speaking more vendors, but in terms of our office staff, we also bring our office staff to the field quarterly to go over different work types, to go over different, building components of a home, so that they can see the environment that the contractors, vendors typically have to go into every day. We're in New York. It's very, very cold in New York and Maine. And making sure that our office staff understand those conditions is important to understand how to support our vendors. But we also Innovative has a quality control team that they go out and meet our contractors on site during their first couple of visits. So they meet with them to go over bidding requirements, because that's obviously a huge thing. You want to make sure your bids are right the first time you put them in, what we're looking for, how to use the various technology that our vendors are, required to utilize. Go through, work order processing and stuff like that. We think that them being able to meet someone directly on site, form that, relationship and learn from someone how to do what they're, expected to do has been really helpful. And we've seen contractors really appreciate that. Bill really has also gone out of his way to provide support to our vendors. We pay them weekly. Like I said, we have people staffed on the weekend, on holidays. Everyone has my cell phone number and a lot of other people in our offices. So I think just being there for the support first and foremost, and then right when they start, immediately going over the most important expectations and requirements that we have in person if we can.
Okay. All right. Cool. Tom?
Yeah, I clearly agree with pretty much everything you just said. Credentialing, vetting, getting the right vendor for the right, not trying to get them to do something that's outside of their scope. Meeting them in the field whenever possible. That's huge. Walking through every part of the process, helping them with the technology, getting them signed up, showing them how to use it, working through that. That's really, really big. And then just explaining not just what, but why. Like, why does the client want this, right? And I think once you explain to them why they want it, then they kind of get it. Something clicks. So that's kind of my approach. Is I came from the field, so I talk from the field, and I like to take them out there and just kind of walk them through and explain everything.
Yeah, well, that's great that you guys are both there. I think those are great lessons for people to take away. Again, Tom, you and I have been in the business for quite some time. I do recall that, back in the day when we used to start out was, if you were in for field services, you were in for everything, right? The requirement was you had to be able to do evictions, you had to be able to do roofs, you had to be able to do grass cuts. And I think that's one of the things that the industry has realized is that, let's put the right people in the right position to make them successful. So now you do have vendors who do just maybe supply, a particular service, or you have a special network that goes out and deals specifically with roofs or mold or something, or discoloration or something of those lights. So I think the industry has really tried to take that into account. I think where the challenge lies is kind of in our last statement when we talked about timelines and things along those lines. Some of those vendors, you know, roofers, if you get a roof vendor, typically that roof vendor is booked out for a couple weeks, right? Maybe even the entire summer in some areas where there's short summers. So again, but I think we've done that, and I think that's really important to maintain quality as well as retention. So I think those are great answers. So thanks for sharing.
Something that Tom said really, really just stuck with me, explaining the why. I've been with Innovative for 12 years, and at the beginning, I was like, I don't understand why we would do this. I don't understand why we would do that. I don't understand why they're expecting this. And really understanding the why behind it. I ask a lot of why questions, and finding out those answers has helped me personally work with our contractors more. Instead of just telling them you need to do this because they said, explaining it, they're way more likely to understand, obviously, and then do the work exactly as we're requesting, because it like you said, it just clicks for them. That just really stood out to me.
Yeah, definitely resonates for sure. Yeah, nobody just likes to be told to do something. They like
Right.
to understand why they're doing it for sure, for sure.
Well, and nobody wakes up in the morning and says, let me go fail, or let
Right,
me go back to this property over and over and over again.
Right.
correct.
Right. So the proper training and the proper vetting, and I have way more respect for a vendor who tells me this is outside of my skill level than I would somebody who just comes and says I can do everything everywhere. To me, that's just
Right.
a big red flag.
So, last question. Um, how can associations like NAMFS help address workforce shortages and improve contractor safety and morale? Tom, you want to start out there?
I think if we could, instead of looking at every vendor, they need to exclusively work, we work together and we share some of the vendors. I don't, maybe share is probably not a good word, but like a recruiting hub, partner with trade schools, partner with veterans groups, retired police officers, reentry programs. I think promoting standardized certificates, working with, hey, take this course or whatever, just innovation, right? To elevate the crew, making sure that, again, that they know what and why. I think there's a lot of people that we could bring into this industry that maybe they don't even know it exists, even to this day. That's kind of the way I look at it.
Okay, all right. Kayla?
I have some notes written down. The first thing I have written down is continuing to educate vendors on why requirements are what they are. So that kind of goes back to our last question. I think that we as an AMS, we have such an array of expertise and knowledge and obviously tenure. So I think explaining to contractors, vendors, not only new ones who come into our industry, but also ones who may be a little bit set in their ways, kind of really explaining. And I don't want to necessarily use the word educating because, like I said, there are vendors who are very seasoned and know what they're doing. But just kind of from our perspective, explaining it more in a way that's more easily digestible. Um, and gets them on board, gets that buy-in for why we're doing what we're doing. And I do also think that going back to the pricing part of it, and the fact that the vendors are the heart of our industry, they're the ones in these communities, they live there, they work there, their children go to school there. Any pricing that gets changed through this pricing initiative, I think we collectively could ensure that that rolls downhill to our vendors. They bear the weight of insurances, they bear the weight of technology subscriptions, they bear the weight of liabilities, personal property claims. You know the phrase, X rolls downhill. Pricing should also, or pricing increases should also do the same. And I think that vendors really need to know, seasoned and new, that NAMFS is working to do that for them because we understand how important they are to what we do every day.
Yeah, like I said, I think, obviously in the initiative that we've had and we continue to work on and we do have that committee, that standing committee that continues to work on it. One of the big things was pledges, right? The pledge that said, that the majority of that increase would go down to the field, to the work provider, who's actually, and I call them the mortgage field service professional, right? Who's out there. I
100%.
think that's key. Um, it is a challenge, right? Because everybody's an independent business and
Sure.
everyone, even within those businesses, does things a little differently, right? Without a doubt, when increases do come, the prices have to go all the way through the supply chain. They can't just make it to one or two stops and then that's where it goes, right? So I think those are challenges, and that is something that NAMS is working on. NAMS, like I said, we're trying to do things with our academy as well, where people can become educated, learn a little bit more about the space, and then once they pass the courses, they can send us back some information, and then we put them up on the opportunity post page, where they could potentially find new work. So again, at least we know that they understand the basics, realizing that Ours is a basic course. At least, we feel that, the course in its entirety is, 70 to 80% of what's out there. There's obviously everybody has a little bit of differences, little nuances, but definitely something that's out there. And then how can we share that so that individuals can find more work? Much like what Tom indicated a little bit earlier with, kind of being that hub or that resource that's out there. So yeah, definitely there's some things that NAMFS is working on and continues to work on. So thank you once again for your time. I really appreciate it. As we've heard today, the future of the field service industry depends more on just processes and performance. It depends on people. Retention, training, credentialing, and trust aren't just operational strategies. They're commitments that shape quality, safety, and the long-term sustainability of our industry. By investing in modernizing policies and creating stronger partnerships, we can build a vendor network that's resilient, skilled, and proud to be part of the industry. NAMFS remains dedicated to supporting this mission through research, advocacy, education, and collaboration across the entire servicing chain. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Unlocked. And until next time, stay safe, stay engaged, and keep building a stronger industry together.
Thank you for watching and/or listening. Please be sure to subscribe to the NAMFS YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. We look forward to next Wednesday when we unlock our next episode.